Okay, Crazy Frank here. I've got a small gunsmithing business in Fresno, California, and I've watched YouTube and seen a few videos on the Ruger 1022 trigger group and felt that they left a few things out. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to go through this with you and show you what I do, and hopefully it'll be of some help to you. It's really simple to disassemble. You just push out most of your pins. Go ahead and you can pull the trigger and release the hammer tension. You can push this pin out and get your hammer out. And the spring, not the hammer spring, it's actually the spring for the bolt release. And you got one at the bottom that releases your bolt release. And now this won't pull out. Well, it did pull out, but usually you have to push in slightly on the mag release itself and then pull the release lever out the bottom. Then you have the trigger itself. Be careful of this little booger because he can go anywhere, and they're hard to find when they hit the floor. Now you have a stripped trigger housing. These are all your pieces. We'll talk about them as we put them back in. But before I get to that, let's talk about the buffer pin. This is the buffer pin. This is a stock one. It's steel. Every time the gun cycles and chambers around, the bolt comes back, hits this, and it makes a very metallic sound, and you can actually get wear on your bolt. So I make one. You can buy them on the internet for $7 or $8, but then pay the freight. I go to the hardware store and you buy a 1/4 by 3-inch nylon bolt, cut the unthreaded portion to the correct length. This thing costs 57 cents, 5 minutes of your time to make it. We've put thousands of rounds through these guns with this buffer pin. There is no wear whatsoever, and it just makes the gun so much better, quieter. It's just a better way to go. So it's something that you can do if you want to. The next thing to do as you're putting it back together, well, let's talk a minute first. I changed the trigger pull. From the factory, these have a 6.5 pound trigger pull. Building this particular gun for my wife, so I wanted to take some material off the bottom of the hammer. I use a piece of plate glass. It's flat. And with this on the plate glass, I just draw the hammer back and forth, taking material off of this surface. I spent maybe 5 minutes, not wanting to take off too much. I reassembled the trigger group, and my first test, I was 3.5 pounds, and that was my target. So I didn't have to touch the sear. You can take a little bit off the leading edge of the sear. That's a lot riskier. I would suggest doing most of your work on the hammer, and you can get it down. I would say before taking off too much, take a little bit off this if you want to get down to a 2-pound trigger pull. But anyway, that's that. This is your bolt release. From the factory, this bolt release has a wrong tool. This has a heart-shaped piece that comes down into this area. And you just take a Dremel tool and take that off. The ones you buy on the internet actually go up a little bit, but they work fine if it's just flat. And these are going to be $8-10 plus freight on the internet. You can do it yourself for just a few minutes. So now let's talk about assembly. The first thing we want to assemble is the trigger itself. And it's made up of, well, 5 pieces if you count this in the pin. But we have this piece which has in it a hole right here, and the sear has also a hole. This very small spring you don't want to lose goes in that hole. It sits into the trigger. This comes over the top and captures that spring in the corresponding hole. Here is where I made another piece. This is made from a nail. It's 120 thousandths in diameter. It's a 1/2 inch long. I've seen them on the internet use weed eater cord, round toothpicks, but this little pin will make your life much easier. Now that it's together, everything is all fine, it's all together, you can now drop it into the housing, and it's there, and it can't fall out, it can't come apart. If you try to use the pin that comes from the factory, it won't fit down inside, and it'll fall apart as you try and drop it in, and I'm kind of clumsy and got fat fingers, so that doesn't work for me. So you drop your trigger in, you have to put the trigger return spring. There's a hole in the back of your trigger guard, the plastic portion facing out. So when it goes in, the trigger, the back of the trigger will sit on the return spring, and that will be what brings the trigger back to its proper position once you have pulled the trigger. The nail is shiny, so with any luck, you have 3 pins, 2 the same length, 1 shorter. You want the shorter pin. You line up the nail, and with any luck, it'll push through first time, and of course it didn't. You push it through, and when it goes through, it will push the nail out the other side. Be sure to deburr your nail, because we're talking about a polymer trigger and a polymer case. If you have a burr on your pin, it can take out material, and that's the last thing that you want to do. There it goes through. And it pushed out my pin. The next thing we want to put in is the hammer. I'm going to turn it over. The hammer is going to go this way, and we have a spring, and this spring has on it a dog leg. Hopefully you can see that. That dog leg must go towards the inside. So we put the hammer here, we put the spring on it, and we drop it in. Once it's in the housing, the spring can't fall off. Now, probably the most difficult part. This hammer is under spring tension with the sear. And you have to line it up, and the best way, or the easiest way, is to pull the trigger. But you need a third hand, and I don't have a third hand. So it can be a little difficult. If your wife is handy, you can say, hey, put this pin in after you line everything up. But you line it up. I got it in fairly easy this time. Next thing is probably good is to put in your hammer spring. In the back of your case, there's a hole. Probably can't see it in this light, but it's easy to see when you look. That's where your hammer spring goes. You then bring the hammer back, and this thing is flat and goes right into that groove on your hammer. Pull it back, and it'll cock. Now your hammer's out of the way, and this spring, you want to keep it up. Don't let it drop inside. Next thing might be our bolt release. It goes in, and we have 3 pieces here. We have the magazine release, spring, and release. Then we have the magazine release lever, and then we have the bolt release. Now those all 3 have to line up, and the hole will go through all 3 of these. And this can be a little difficult to line up, but shouldn't be too bad. Yep. Just fell out. Okay, I'm through everything now except for the... Okay, now our magazine release is in, bolt release, the magazine release, and the lever. This spring, which I told you about earlier, sits on, when it rolls over, that little lever, that little dog leg sits on top of the mag release. Bolt release, sorry. Now, take your pin and just push it through part way. Put your ejector on. Now you're going to need to push down this spring so that it goes underneath this pin. pin is in, it's together. You got your bolt release, a magazine release, your bolt release, which will be automatic now, your hammer, which is configured. It's finished. Hopefully that was some help to you. Crazy Frank signing out.